Hi, I'm Tricia, Research Manager at Immerse.
I'm Christina, Curriculum and Assessment Manager at Immerse.
Welcome to Connecting the Dots, Converse on the Verse. This show is all about diving into the pedagogy and efficacy behind Immerse, the first virtual reality language learning platform designed specifically for live language teaching and learning.
Today's episode is all about the research behind VR in language learning. I hope you enjoy this episode.
Hey everyone, welcome to our third episode of Connecting the Dots, Converse on the Verse with Christina and I. Today I'm so excited because we're diving into my favorite topic, which is research on VR for language learning. So Christina is going to be asking me all the hard-hitting questions about the efficacy of VR. So yeah, Christina, I think I'll just turn it over to you. What do you want to know?
Okay, this is great. I've seen some of your reports, but I need you to drill it down for the rest of us. Okay, so let's just start out because you hear this all the time. People are like, VR is so much fun. It's like a game you're playing, but are we really learning? Do we have any evidence, Tricia, that it actually works?
Yeah, that is a great question. And before we even, it's a massive question. So I will do my best to kind of break it down succinctly here. But before we even get into the research, I do want to say, yes, it's fun, but it's also a lot of work. Okay, it's a lot of work to get these headsets set up if you're using it in a classroom, right? And so you do want to make sure that it works before you're spending students' time and also teachers' time using it. So in terms of the research, people, myself included, sometimes I'll say, okay, like we're just now really getting into VR research because for a while headsets were so expensive and it was hard to get access to enough of them to be able to conduct a study that's like, big enough to be able to make any claims. But at the same time, we do have so much research that's been done for years. I mean, well before I was in this field, on virtual worlds for language learning. Things like Second Life is a huge one that a lot of listeners have probably heard of. So there's been so much research done in those settings that still apply to VR. So yes, there are differences in terms of when you're like in fully immersive VR, you can interact with objects more, kind of have more like embodied learning. There are differences, but a lot of the research from the Second Life era still holds in terms of efficacy. But that being said, to kind of narrow the scope, when I talk about research on this podcast, I am going to focus on what we call like high immersion VR or VR that has, research that has been conducted on learners who are using headsets and really in like a fully immersive embodied experience. And so in terms of the field at large, I mean, you can imagine a lot of people have started out looking at different affective factors. VR has been found to reduce foreign language anxiety. That was my focus. And I looked at it from like the self-reported data, but also physiologically. So I actually saw that learners' salivary cortisol levels. So that's a hormone that is produced in your spit. That's an indicator of anxiety at the time that it's measured. I did a study that basically showed that learners had lower salivary cortisol levels while they were in VR compared to classroom settings and Zoom.
Wow.
Yeah, I also did some research looking at heart rate data as well. So we know a lot about anxiety. At this point, it's pretty much confirmed. There's been a lot of studies showing that VR leads to lower foreign language anxiety. And that is because, and again, there's been qualitative work done that, where students are interviewed. And that is because mostly the use of avatars. So because learners are concealed, sometimes their identity is truly hidden. Other times it's just the fact that people can't physically see them. It definitely helps lower that affective filter. And so, and the fact that it's like game-like and more fun and less serious too, right? It all kind of combines together to lead to lower anxiety. Same thing with like motivation, engagement. Really all the affective factors have been pretty extensively researched. I'm always hesitant to say extensively researched because, of course, there's always more. But I feel like that's where the most work has been done in the field. And then in terms of learning gains, because obviously that's a huge component too, right? Like we want our learners to be more comfortable. but we also want to make sure they're learning. So there have been studies looking at vocabulary acquisition in VR, and that have found that yes, it is beneficial, especially when students are able to like interact with the objects, right? So that goes back to what you were saying last week. Being able to actually touch and manipulate objects helps them learn and remember the words better. There's also been work done on, pragmatics, oral production, a lot of things done on oral proficiency gains. Really, those speaking and listening skills have been most extensively researched, which makes sense. VR is most
Right.
appropriate for that at this point. But there have actually still been like one or two studies on reading comprehension, and shockingly have shown an advantage for VR, which I was actually really surprised by. But again, it's because when they're reading that story, they have the context to understand, right?
Oh yeah.
Um,
Context is everything. So
yeah.
you did mention, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you did mention speaking, and I know you shared with me a TOEIC uh, research result. Can you share that out? Because I think that's so notable.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for bringing that up. That was done by one of Immerse's research partners. So for everyone listening, Immerse, because we're a startup, but we have a small team, the way that we've been able to conduct so much research is by partnering with universities and partnering with experts at those institutions who can actually conduct research studies showing that, or not showing, seeing if Immerse is actually beneficial for language learning. And so one of our partners at Aoyama University in Japan, they actually conducted a study and they had students, I want to make sure I'm saying this right, but they took lessons for 4 months in Immerse once a week, and their TOEIC scores, so their English TOEIC speaking scores, improved by 100+ points.
That's
And
amazing. That's a
yeah, it
huge
was a
jump. That's a
huge
huge
gap. It
jump.
was a huge jump.
Yeah.
And then the professor who conducted the study was saying he was so excited because traditionally, after like I believe it was 4 years of study, um, in like a traditional classroom, they only improved by 56 points normally on average. So he
Wow.
was shocked to see like how did they improve so quickly. And again, it goes back to the context of having it there, but also we know that Japanese language learners are traditionally very anxious and do not want to take
Right.
risks to communicate in the target language. They're really hesitant to speak. And those students, the same students, in kind of like a follow-up interview with them, they were saying, well, I was so much more comfortable talking because of the avatar, because people couldn't see me. I was so much less stressed. And so I think it's that too. It's the fact that they're actually able to apply some of what they might have already known, but apply it in VR and then actually see, okay, I can do this before they
Right.
go take their TOEIC
Right.
exam.
Yeah, I mean that statistic just blows my mind because as a
Yeah.
practitioner of so many years who tried to help raise those scores, we couldn't accomplish that in a semester, a year, what was accomplished in VR. So, yeah, and I wanna follow up with that a little bit. So that's one specific piece of
Hmm.
research that came out of our partnerships. But how about Immerse specifically? Like, are there certain features that we have beyond the avatar that research has shown to be
Hmm.
really beneficial to language learning?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, like I said, that was from one of our partners. We do have like 25 university partners at this point, but we also do conduct internal research, and that can look a lot of different ways. It can look more like user research or like member surveys to get feedback on a new product feature or just, kind of their perceptions of the platform. But we also do conduct studies. And so one of the ones that we're currently working on, it is a massive study that we will get into in a later week. But it's a research study that's been funded by Meta, and the overall goal is to get 500 VR headsets with Immerse on them, of course, into 12 different high schools throughout the US. And then within those high schools, distributed to all the different language teachers who are basically going to be rotating through their set of headsets and using Immerse with their students. So that, like I said, we'll get into it another week, but we did a pilot for that study this past spring, and we look specifically at vocabulary learning. Just as a starting point, we're going to expand to other things in this upcoming year. But what we found is that our students who are learning in Immerse VR, compared to students learning like more in a traditional desktop setting. So we actually did compare like technology to technology, but VR versus a desktop environment. And what we found was that students in Immerse learned vocabulary better, significantly better, than their counterparts, and that effect was even larger. We then looked at it from like, okay, could they interact with the object that they were trying to learn the word for? So we had them going into the shopping center, doing kind of like a scavenger hunt per se, with the object scanner that we have in Immerse. They would find the object, they would have to scan, hear the pronunciation in French, because these were French language learners. And then if they could interact with the object, they had to do that. So if it was a hat, they had to put the hat on. If it was like a shopping basket, they had to pick it up and like carry it around. And what we found was that they did actually, when they were able to interact with the objects, they remembered them even better than just the ones that they like saw and scanned and heard the word. And that goes along with other work that has been done in VR as well, that has shown that yes, students learn vocabulary better in VR, and yes, the effect is even stronger if they're able to actually interact with the object. So that's why I was asking about object interaction last week, because I feel like that is a huge like a huge benefit of our platform that some other VR apps I've seen for language learning, it's more like static images
Right.
or static 360 scenes. So I think like the fact that they can really pick them up and interact with them is critical.
Right. No, it's amazing. And even, I know you compared it to other technologies, but we have the desktop app and they still have the avatar and do you suspect that it's pretty much the same in the desktop app because they still have the avatar because they get to interact with objects?
I think in terms of the effective filter, which is such a big component of this, yes. I do think there's something to be said about being like fully immersed and completely cut off from the outside world. And this is not something we've looked at Immerse yet, but this is something that I looked at in previous research studies that I conducted, looking at learning on Zoom versus VR and seeing that, hey, on Zoom, you have like your screen up, you have other distractions. So I do think there's a benefit there of like students who are in the headset, they're fully present, they're really focused on the task at hand. Even when they pick up the objects, they're actually making the motion of like, say, it's like pouring the coffee. They're actually really pouring it compared to just, clicking the pour button.
Right.
But I think they're both beneficial in different ways, right? VR headsets can be fatiguing and not everyone has them. So I think there's strengths of both versions of our platform. But that's something that I've actually been really, since we launched the desktop, I've been trying to find a research partner who will like really do like a more quantitative study comparing the two to see what we find.
Right. Oh no, it's so interesting. But I think just lowering that affective filter alone is huge for language
Oh yeah,
learning. I
it's
mean,
huge.
the stress of sitting in a classroom and trying to produce in front of others and not losing face like that's huge. Well, I so enjoyed hearing you talk about Immerse and the evidence behind the VR platform. And I see your excitement for it and it's really kind of contagious. So I
Yeah.
so appreciate that.
I'm excited to, in future weeks, to dive into like specific studies and just even like how we've designed even our gamification system that we're going to be coming out with
Yeah.
soon, very soon at this point, only a few weeks. All of that is built on research. Whenever our product team is implementing a new feature, they always come to research and, learning and efficacy and say like, what does the research show us? How do we do this in the best way possible, right?
Right.
So that doesn't always mean it's perfect, but I feel like we really try to be conscious of like, what does the research show? What previous work has been done so far, and how can we
Right.
make the most informed choices and decisions we can in a field that is still, they're still in its beginning in so many ways.
Right. And I so appreciate that about Immerse, that we're grounded
Hmm.
in research, but we're also grounded in sound pedagogy, right?
Right.
And so,
That brings us to next week.
okay, so go ahead, give us the plug for next week.
I was gonna say next week we're gonna talk about what does it mean to focus on a communicative task, and this which I am thrilled to hear what Christina says about the next question. What role does grammar play in it? Because I feel like this is a hot debate,
It is a
regardless
hot
of
debate.
like, do
Yeah.
we teach grammar explicitly, implicitly? So I'm excited to see kind of Christina's take on it. Yeah,
Awesome. I'm
I think it's
excited
gonna be
too
really
because
interesting.
it's been a dialogue in the field for since I've been in the field.
Yeah,
We can't come to agreement anywhere on that,
the
but I think I
research
have
can't
some
either.
answers. So yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you all for watching today. And Tricia, thank you so much because I
Yeah.
think, it's really important for people to understand that it's not just fun and play. There's some real learning going on, and there's a lot
Oh,
of great
yeah,
research out there that tells us there's real learning going on and at much faster
exactly.
rates than maybe what's happening in the classroom. So
Exactly.
appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Christina, for asking me all the questions. And yeah, I think that concludes our episode for today.
Awesome.